There we go. So welcome everyone. A smaller group we seem to be for our July session. Middle of the summer. I think the summer holidays are beginning to bite in. Special thank you, Stacey, for joining us. Torio, always pleasure to reconnect, to catch up. Joe's there as well. Thank you, Joe. And Alexander, who's in Poland, Southwest Poland, yes?
Yes, Southwest, right.
Okay, here we go. All right. So today, the focus is on measurement. And one of the things we've been doing for the monthly meetings is just giving it a bit of a focus on one of the key areas. So a couple of months, and Joe's with us, did a great presentation on the communication challenge. We've also had one of the members present on the challenges in nonprofit. And today we're going to put the focus on measurement. But before we go into that, just a couple of, couple of updates. My computer Wi-Fi has died, so I'm working off the laptop again today. So my apologies for that disconnect. There we go. And it keeps crashing on me. 1 second, give it one more go. My apologies. Okay, try that one again. Here we go. So just a couple of quick updates, and Antonio, if you've got anything to add after, please jump in. Antonio and I are delighted that the official copy of the Body of Knowledge has taken a big step forward. And we're this month getting it prepared to load up to Amazon. So all the design layout work is done. And we're very much looking forward to launching it in a couple of months' time. This has been really about a 5-year journey for Antonio and I, since we first started putting together the concept, the framework, and the content. The purpose of the Body of Knowledge for the members is the 12 weeks after your access to the online course is complete. If there's a trigger and you think, oh, I want to use a model or a framework, it's an easy reference. So as you can see, it'll be both electronic and a hard copy, depending on the user's preference. And our goal is that for the members, it works as a reference book as the Body of Knowledge. And we also want to share it with non-members to give them that missing structure that's so often missing in implementation. We worked a lot with our designer to really upgrade the 2021 version that you have. So just to give you a bit of a look and a feel, it's got the color coding around the 7 areas that make up the framework, the strategy implementation roadmap. It's come together very well. We're very happy with the work the designer's done, and we look forward to sharing the final copy with you in the next couple of months. Antonio, anything from your side you want to update on?
No, thank you, Robin. Amazing work. Thank you. I can't wait to get the copies and start promoting them. Thank you.
So, thanks, Antonio. So the focus today is, I don't want to take too much time away from the discussion with Stacey that we're going to have. And, you know, we're a smaller group, but it will allow us to have a more in-depth discussion. And I put up this image, which is one that I use with leaders, because to this day, when I walk into the room to discuss anything around strategy and its implementation, there's still an ambiguity around the language. So I'm just going to take a couple of minutes, Stacey, to introduce the language and just set things up. And then we're going to introduce yourself and hand it over to you. Cool. So you can see at the top of the box, ever since Pallas and Collins published Built to Last in the late 90s, we've accepted vision, mission, and values are the overriding, giving the direction, giving the purpose, giving meaning to why we're in business. In just 2019, it was official that we changed the word shareholder to stakeholder. And we now don't just work for shareholder value, but to provide value to our employees, our customer, our community, as well as the shareholders. How do you deliver the vision? You got to craft the strategy. The strategy, as Porter says, how you differentiate yourself. So what will differentiate you in the market to deliver your vision? And the work we've done in the last 20, 30 years, and those who've gone through the SIP, Strategy Implementation Professional course, very much aware of the essential need to break that strategy down into the objectives. So trying to, just the classic example I give is a new leader joins the company, and on their first day, they're given a big fat A4 binder and said, read our strategy. And of course, it doesn't have the impact or the result. So today we've got into the habit, we break it down. Typically many people use OKRs or the pump, which Stacey will talk about, or the balanced scorecard. So we very much focus on chunking it out, making the strategy easier to manage. And then the rule of thumb for every objective, you have to have a measure, which we still have to explain to leaders. Of course, without a measure, how do you know whether you're succeeding? And the measures drive the actions. So you have your baseline. For example, we're at 70% customer satisfaction. We want to get to 80. What are the actions we're going to take to move the needle? So the actions drive the performance. And then the missing block, the penultimate one, so often missing, is then making sure we hold people accountable, which is very much part of why Stacey and I have connected, not only our passion for measurement, but making sure we deliver on the performance. So with that, our focus for today's session is very much looking around the measures that are going to deliver on the objectives. And interestingly, one major change or another major change on top of shareholder becoming stakeholder is many people today are introducing the sustainability as the fifth element of a balanced scorecard. So even for, just a few months ago, I was working with one of my clients, and we had updated it, and they use also sustainability, recognizing that we have a greater responsibility to the community and environment. So sustainability has very much become part of a scorecard today, and that's one of the other changes that we're seeing. So on that note, it's my pleasure to introduce Stacey. She and I met thanks to Richard, who's the CEO of our partner, APMG. And we just started connecting very recently. And she's been kind enough to give us her time this afternoon. She's Australia's leading expert in evidence-based leadership and practical performance measurement, with the emphasis on practical. Everyone's got measures, but are we using them effectively? She's created a methodology. I hope you're going to explain in more depth today about PUMP. I was just sharing that she was kind enough to share the book. We did a book swap a few months ago, and I'm just about to start reading PUMP. So she's got practical performance measurement and Prove It that explain her methodology and approach. And she's learned the cause behind these struggles, that many leaders are struggling, and they created frameworks and techniques that help create high performance culture and measurable success that she'll talk about. And her two books, a bit too fast there, highly recommend. I've already glanced through and ready, got Prove It to take next week on my long haul flight to Europe. And then Practical Performance Management explains the PUMP blueprint. So in preparation for today, Stacey said, few would disagree that organizational success depends on successful strategy implementation, which of course, us at the Institute fully agree with you, Stacey. And unfortunately, despite the mainstream approaches to strategy, we all know more implementations fail than succeed. So addressing three vital things that are often too often missing. What are they? That's what she's going to share. These missing things come from, surprisingly, from proper performance measurement approach. We'll explore what a proper performance measurement approach is and how it contributes to these three vital missing things for strategy implementation success. And then afterwards, we won't do as a breakout, but we'll have a discussion about Stacey, and she's asked we'll do questions at the end. So please do put any questions in the chat box or save them for the end, and then we'll discuss the key takeaways that we get from Stacey and what we can apply, which is always the focus within the Institute. So on that note, it's my absolute delight and thank you for taking the time. Phil, good to see you. Neil is here as well. Stacey, it's my delight to welcome you and thank you for participating on the Institute. And let me hand over to you.
Thank you, Robin. That's a really groovy introduction. I'm really happy to be here and to share these ideas with you all on this topic of measurement's unique impact on strategy implementation. Let me share my screen, Robin. Tell me if it's coming through okay.
Will do.
How's that?
Here we go. Yep, perfect.
Lovely. So as Robin suggested, we're going to be talking or exploring three vital things that are really important to successful strategy implementation, which, at least from my own experience, they come uniquely from a proper approach to performance measurement. Most of my work in performance measurement has been with its use in measuring strategy at all levels, from the top of the organization and how it gets cascaded through. But over all of these years, and I'm talking some 20 years, so it's not just a handful, the same struggles just keep surfacing for people who are trying to measure any aspect of their strategy. And those sorts of struggles are things like goals that are too intangible to measure, or measures that just seem a little bit too trivial to be useful, a lack of staff engagement in measuring strategy, fear of measurement being used as a big stick, also the time and effort to get measures implemented and reported. And there are other struggles as well. What I've listed there is probably some of the more common ones. The same goes for strategy implementation, I suppose, that there are similar struggles that do get in the way of strategy being cascaded, being understood, being monitored, and ultimately being achieved. And like you all know as well, at least as well as I do, why strategy implementation fails. And depending on what we read, I guess, we hear that somewhere between 60% and 90% of strategic plans fail. Harvard Business Review research in 2020 found some disturbing, I think disturbing numbers anyway. 85% of executive leadership teams spend less than 1 hour per month discussing strategy. 50% spend no time at all discussing strategy. And this is the scary one for me, 95% of a company's employees don't understand the strategy. Now, while most of this failure rests on implementation, I think also the design of the strategy plays a role in this failure as well. Strategy experts give varied reasons for why we have such horrible statistics when it comes to strategy failing, like too much internal focus, not deeply enough understanding the environment that the organization's constrained by and operating in, not deeply enough understanding the organization's capabilities, lack of strategic thinking in the leadership team, uncoordinated or conflicting priorities, and all the implementation problems as well, like lack of communication and lack of understanding of the goals, poor cascading of strategy. Is cascading a word you guys use, Robin, in
Yep,
strategy
no
implementation?
problem with that. Cascading works great.
Cool. Strategies that aren't actionable, unclear responsibilities, there's that accountability piece in the model you just showed us, Robin, and so on. Now, most of those problems need to be dealt with, I think, in the strategy design process. But what we'll do is pick up on the point at which we do have a strategy that's based on pretty good thinking, pretty good research, pretty good analysis. And it is a strategy that is now worth implementing. But let's also assume, and I think this is a safe assumption to make, that measurement has an essential and non-negotiable role in the achievement of strategy. And it's great to see it. It's got a spotlight on it in your model too, Robin, for the Institute.
Yeah.
Measurement's the only objective way to track the achievement of goals over time, and to tell us how well our strategies are working, and when to take course correcting action. So there are 3 ways that strategy implementation fails when the measurement process isn't done properly. Now, the first way that it falls over is in how the strategy is articulated. And what I mean by that is simply the words that we use to write the goals or objectives in your model that comprise the strategy. Now, this starts at the corporate level, but the same wording problem can kind of filter down and continue into all of the operational goals too, as they're cascaded. The words that are the problem are called weasel words. It's not my term. I learned it many, many years ago. A political speechwriter here in Australia wrote a book called Death Sentence, The Decay of Public Language, and he talks about weasel words. I mean, you can read some of them on the screen there. They're
I've
words.
never heard it before, Stacey.
No, really? Wow, there you go.
I like it, I get it, but first time
Yeah.
I've heard it.
I think those working in strategy straight away understand what we're talking about here. They're ambiguous words. They can mean different things to different people in different contexts, and that's really why they're a big problem. They're not specific, they're not observable, and therefore they are not measurable. So a strategy that people just don't understand, or that people have this mixed up interpretation of, that strategy can never really get implemented as it was intended, because in truth, no one really knows what results they're supposed to be focusing on and achieving. I can clearly remember being in Wellington in New Zealand a few years ago, running a pump blueprint training workshop with a group of people in a government agency. And during one of the breaks in the training, I was talking to one of the senior leaders who dropped by just to see how the training was going. And he made some comment wondering why it was so hard to get people engaged in the strategy. He had an absolutely stunned expression on his face when I said that his employees were too scared to let him know that they didn't understand the strategic goals. Like he really didn't know that was commonplace, and it is commonplace, not just in that organization, but all over the place. He, like many other leaders, often have no idea that using those weasel words is a really big problem with strategy getting understood. The words in our goals can and really should be changed to make them clear. So I'm an advocate for getting rid of the weasel words. The way to bring our goals into focus so that everyone understands them is to change the weasel words into, bear with me on this, change them into language that a 10-year-old can understand. Now, that's not to dumb down the goals, it's to make them clearly say what we meant by them all along. This is important in the measurement process because vague goals can't be measured meaningfully. In PUMP, our measurement methodology, we deal with this problem early on before we even talk about what the performance measures should be. And the PUMP technique that we use goes a little like this. So take this goal, for example, foster a collaborative and engaged workforce. Not too unusual as far as goals are concerned.
Stacey, can I jump in? I know you said wait till the end, but you and I've mentioned the word pump a couple of times, and the others haven't heard the term before. Do you want to just explain that it's your proprietary approach that you developed? Just give it a 30-second background, because people won't be familiar with it.
That's cool. I do have a slide at the end we can go through if you want, where I take you through what pump is, but it's 8 steps.
Yeah.
It's kind of an acronym, a word that grew from an acronym, the performance measurement process, and it just got nicknamed pump. The idea is that performance measurement is not a brainstorming session. It's not a come up with a list of measures kind of workshop. It actually is a process to select and implement and use performance measures well. And people have so many struggles with this, and I did too when I started out in my career 25 years ago. And I've kind of created pump to help me, and then it turned out it helped others. So it's evolved since then. But what it's evolved to today is these 8 steps. I'm going to give you little tastes of it through through exploring these 3 points. But at the end, I have got that slide, Robin. So if there's time, I can walk everybody through the 8 steps.
Thank you.
So this goal: foster a collaborative and engaged workforce or workplace. So both collaborative and engaged are what I call weasel words. Most people will have different ideas about what they mean, and everybody else will have no idea what they are supposed to mean. So what do the leaders really mean by these words? Well, we have to have the conversation about that. And when we do, in this particular example, the leaders decided that really collaborative actually meant that teams can reach their goals without manager intervention. And what they meant by engaged was that people just never tire of the work they do here. And so we rewrite the original goal using the words that are much more clear and specific, so that we can communicate through the goals what we really meant in the first place. So that foster a collaborative and engaged workforce or workplace, it becomes 2 specific statements. We call them performance results in pump. Teams reach their goals without manager intervention, and people never tire of the work they do here. So they're measurable now. People will understand what they mean, and now they become measurable. They become measurable because we can start imagining what they look like when they're happening around us, or we can imagine what it looks like when they're not happening around us. So writing goals clearly, it actually helps directly then with the next way that strategy implementation can fall down. And that is the way that strategy gets cascaded. Now, it's not enough to, oops, I've just lost control of my mouse. There we go. It's not enough to just give teams some strategic initiatives to implement, because they also need to know what results they should be creating or improving through those strategic initiatives. Great strategy implementation happens when people are engaged in the difference that they're part of creating. So just blindly ticking off tasks and milestones without a clear outcome, it just is not engaging. It also doesn't work to give them their own mini-me versions of the strategic goals either, because copies of the strategic goals, they don't make sense in every team. Not every team should be cutting their own costs in order to reach the corporate cost reduction goal. I recently heard this from a client. I think it's a great analogy. It's like trying to win a hockey game by getting each and every player to score a goal, even the goalie. But the only way that in reality teams throughout the organization can know what to do to help achieve the strategic goals is to know what their own unique way to contribute to them is, just like each player in a hockey team has a unique role on the is it called a field, a hockey field, or the rink if it's ice hockey, I guess. Yeah. So they have a unique role to play to collaborate together to achieve the ultimate outcome, which is winning the game. So we need to cascade strategy with a cause effect map, not a mini-me duplication. So what we can then build from this cause effect cascading is a clear line of sight for every team, from the results that they're responsible for all the way through to the parts of the strategic direction that they contribute to. Now, this line of sight helps to connect everyone to a purpose, to the context or the bigger picture. And if you've read any of Dan Pink's work in his book Drive, he talks about this, that the desire that we all have to connect to something bigger than ourselves. Now, in measurement, we talk a lot about lead indicators and about aligning our KPIs to strategy. And neither of those are possible if we don't cascade strategy in a way that builds this cause effect map in a way that kind of, I guess, unifies every team's role in strategy implementation. Now, in Pump, we have a technique for this, and we call it results mapping. Now, we start by making sure that each strategic goal and the mission and the vision are worded clearly and measurably, just like we discussed before, get rid of the weasel words. Then we start to map these measurable versions of the mission and vision and the strategic goals onto a results map. Now, this example I'm going to give to you is for a medicinal chocolate products manufacturer. And part of their vision is that medicinal chocolate production causes no harm in the world. And one of their strategic goals, well, that's the pink bubble, one of their strategic goals, which in this case is the green bubble, is that cacao farmers lift their communities out of poverty. Well, one department in this organization is the procurement and partnerships department, and they work with the farmers and the suppliers to get all the ingredients for these medicinal chocolate products. They have two goals that directly contribute to this one strategic goal and to the vision. And one of them is cacao farms are profitable, and also that chocolate production is carbon and forest positive. And teams within the procurement and partnerships department, they also have their own goals too. Like cacao farms have high yields of high quality beans, and cacao farms are entirely organic, and all ingredients come from sustainable producers. Now, when everyone is clear about the results that they need to achieve, it makes more sense where to fit the strategic initiatives or the change projects into the map. And that's out here. So, for example, a strategic initiative to help that top orange bubble there, that cacao farms have high yields of high quality beans, is a strategic initiative called Cacao Productivity. And that's a project to work with cacao farms to tailor farming practices in a way that will improve bean quality. And there are a couple of other strategic initiatives as well. So this is the backbone or the building blocks of a results map. Imagine this map now that includes all the vision and mission, all the strategic goals, all of the departments with all of their own goals linking through to it. It'd be a complex map for sure. One of my first clients that worked with the results map, he was a CEO in a little government agency, and he nicknamed this map the Where's Wally diagram. Now, somewhere in the world it's Where's Wally, somewhere else in the world it's Where's Waldo, but basically it's that cartoon of the little guy with the red and white striped hat or t-shirt, and you've got to find him in this very complex cartoon. So he nicknamed it the Where's Wally diagram because he admitted that they can get a bit complex like the cartoon, but he loved how the concept is simple. And how once you can find Wally or Waldo, which in reality could be any team within the organization, you immediately know how they fit into the bigger picture of strategy implementation and achieving the strategy. They can immediately see how they contribute. Everyone can find themselves in a results map like this. Now, this way of cascading strategy, it's not just useful for measuring what matters and having everybody have their own measures that matter. It's also helpful for the third way that strategy implementation can fall down. Now, the third way is when performance monitoring somehow becomes all about the progress of actions, not results. Now, sure, when we're implementing strategy, we're implementing change projects. And part of project management is monitoring the progress of tasks and the achievement of milestones. But the problem that this creates for strategy implementation is that the wrong actions can get implemented really, really well. And the intended results of those actions never end up happening. And sometimes we don't even know. Malcolm Turnbull was one of Australia's previous prime ministers, and I was watching him be interviewed on the 7:30 program by journalist Lee Sales a few years ago. She asked him about the KPIs that he had set for himself and what the public should really be judging him against. Now, he replied that they should judge him against the delivery of the commitments that they'd made, and that the fundamental measurement was that the projects are underway, being delivered, and being delivered on budget. Now, Lee Sales was asking the leader of Australia's government about the results or the impact that the public could expect from his term in government, and his response was that his term in government would be successful if they just implemented the projects that they promised. And this is a typical response from many leaders, really, about how they define success, that actions get implemented. But what about the impact that those actions were meant to create? There's the problem. Project management is not the same as performance management. So we measure project implementation in a way that is not the same as how we should be measuring performance improvement. Strategy is fundamentally about performance improvement. And we need to keep the project management style of monitoring, yeah, sure, but we need to add true performance measurement to that as well. Now, true performance measurement is when we're quantifying direct evidence of the results that we are trying to improve through our strategy. I say results, you might say goals or objectives or impacts. This helps make our goals even more tangible, in fact, by measuring them directly and therefore easier to understand. So good performance measures are course correcting feedback. They're not after the fact proof. So we need to be measuring frequently enough to take course correcting action. Good performance measures also give us objective truth about how well our strategic initiatives are working, which directly helps leaders and teams to keep the strategy implementation on track. So we don't just monitor the implementation of each strategic initiative, that's project management. We need to monitor the degree to which each of those goals or results are being achieved from the corporate strategy all the way down to individual teams. That is what performance management is. So the owners of each goal will design quantitative measures that directly evidence that goal. They'll monitor them frequently enough through time to make sure that they're kind of changing the way that the initiatives are implemented to make sure that those goals are being achieved. Now, how meaningfully we can measure or design measures for our goals or results depends very much on that very first point I was making about how our goals are worded. Weasel words won't help you find meaningful measures. And Pump helps us do this, actually. Pump also has a measure design technique that builds meaningful measures from the direct evidence of those measurable goals. We don't do any brainstorming at all in Pump. So each of these goals gets a measure, basically. These are just the names of the measures that the teams chose for each of those goals, but each measure will also have a clear description that lets you know how it's being quantified. So there we have 3 ways that performance measurement can uniquely impact strategy implementation. I'll just give you a quick summary. So firstly, good measurement contributes to strategy implementation in a sense, how measurable the goals are. So good measurement forces us to describe the specific and clear and observable results in language that a 10-year-old can understand. And when that happens, strategy is understood. And when strategy is understood, it's easier to implement. It's also easier to measure. Good measurement contributes also to how strategy is cascaded in that line of getting that line of sight alignment that helps strategy implementation. And we cascade strategy using a cause effect map, the results map, that helps every team to pretty much see their unique contribution to strategy. So when strategy is made locally relevant in each team, much easier to implement. And the third thing that good measurement contributes to strategy implementation is this results-oriented measurement. Good measurement helps us directly measure the results of our strategic initiatives, and it goes hand in hand with project management. When strategy has results-oriented performance measures, we can take course-correcting action before it's too late. So there you go, good performance measurement, so much more powerful than most people realize, but also it's a lot more deliberate than most people realize as well. It's not just as simple as using a SMART acronym or brainstorming measures. So that's the guts of it. Robin, should we check and just see if we want to dive straight into some questions, or would you like me to do a quick walk through the 8 steps of PUMP?
Why don't you share PUMP first while you've got the screen, and then we can go to questions. Would that be all right?
That sounds fine. Okay. All right, so here is the PUMP methodology in a big picture. So there are 8 steps to it. It is a logical, ordered process. Step 1, it's called understanding measurement's purpose. And it's important because it makes sure that the entire measurement team understands enough about what good measurement practice is to participate in the process. And we've got to do that to nip all of the bad measurement behaviors in the bud and not let them sabotage the process as we go forward. When we go to step 2, which is mapping measurable results, we're doing a couple of things here, really. We're making sure that the goals or the results that we want to achieve are written without those weasel words, results-oriented, written clearly and measurably, but we're also mapping them on that results map as well, so that we've got right in front of us, clear as day, the very important results that we need to design direct measures for. We take that to step 3, designing meaningful measures. And here we're one at a time, looking at those measurable results and deliberately designing measures that are the strongest and most feasible evidence to monitor those results. Before we dive head first into getting all the data and bringing those measures to life, we do a check in step 4, which is about building buy-in to measures. So the measures team looks beyond the measures team to involve other stakeholders in just checking, are these measures making sense? Are they the measures that people are going to find useful and relevant? And they take on feedback from those stakeholders and just fine tune the design or selection of measures. Then they're ready to go to step 5, where we detail the implementation for each measure. And that means, you know, how is it calculated? What data do we need? How frequently do we collect it and put the measure together? After step 5, we have measure data ready. We've got the measure values calculated, and now we want to see what they're telling us. So we go to step 6, and we can start interpreting signals from our measures here. We put each measure into a very specific chart that clearly shows signals of change in the measure over time. And those charts, we can now start looking at the story in our measures, but also even potentially starting to set some targets there in step 6. All of those measures charts get collated together in step 7, where we're reporting our performance measures, not just what the measures are doing, but also why they're doing what they're doing. So some extra analytics happens here, some cause analysis, if you like, to kind of understand why, you know, for those measures that aren't on track to their target, why aren't they? What's getting in the way? What can we learn that might inform the decisions we make about our strategic initiatives, our strategy implementation? And that's really the input that goes into step 8 in PUMP, where we're trying to reach our performance targets, but we're doing it in a way that we have very cause analysis focused decision making, and we can either create a new strategic initiative or tweak an existing one, or whatever needs to happen to start moving as is performance closer to that to be or targeted performance. So what I've shared with you today in those first 3 bits that are missing from strategy implementation really comes from step 2 and 3 in PUMP, but the whole measurement process, as you can see, is more comprehensive. So how about I stop there, and Robin, if anyone's got questions about anything we've
Oh,
talked
I
about,
think it might just
I'm
be
here.
one or two. Stacey, first of all, thank you for taking the time and sharing. That you've been very generous. I'm going to kick it off because I've got an eager question for you. Many of us are, I mean, Stacey's been very humble because she has a legion of followers around the world, pump ambassadors who support and, really, find her approach, her clarity to setting measurement, removing the ambiguity that's so often there. And Stacey, just while we're chatting, people are praising, so thank you for your time. My first question is a generic one, which you must have had before when you deal with leaders, which is, many of us are more familiar rather than pump with OKR or the balanced scorecard.
Mm.
So you must have an answer to that because I'm sure you've been asked it before. Does it contradict? Does it complement? If I did the balanced scorecard 2 years ago, should I use pump? How what's the differentiator, or how would you explain that one for us?
Yeah, in very simplistic language, I would say the balanced scorecard is much more a strategy design tool, not a measurement tool. Even though it talks about having a balanced scorecard and putting measures in there, it's really about how to design your strategy to make sure that the strategic objectives you have are balanced and thorough enough. So very many of pump users around the world are also balanced scorecard users, because the balanced scorecard never told them, how do you design really meaningful measures? You don't brainstorm them, that doesn't work. You don't just copy other people's balanced scorecards in a similar industry or sector to you, it doesn't work. So you've got to be deliberate about how you think about the evidence that's going to show those strategic objectives on your strategy map in your balanced scorecard, how they're really you're going to know they're happening. And pump does that. So pump plugs into balanced scorecard. Yeah, that's probably the easiest answer. As far as OKRs go,
yeah,
yes. As far as OKRs go, I've got to admit that what I've read on them so far is a little conflicting. They sound like a really neat, succinct way to capture your objectives and key results. But the problems I've found in the literature, but also in people's implementation of them when they come to me with questions about them, is that the definition of what the objective is and the definition of what the key result is can be really unclear and ambiguous. So people don't know, is the objective, is that the bit that's supposed to be quantitative and we're supposed to put some kind of target in there? Or is it the key result that's supposed to be the measure part? Or is the key result the action? And it gets all very, very messy. I think if you know pump and you therefore understand what proper measurement of any kind of result is, it makes it so much easier for you to go back and look at your OKRs and go, okay, this is how we're going to define what the objective is and what the key results are, so that people don't get confused, and so that we've got both that that qualitative description of what we're trying to achieve, coupled with the quantitative evidence of the degree to which we're achieving it. And those two bits go together. And that's what people really need to be able to understand what they're changing and what to align their actions to contribute to the achievement of strategy. How's that for a response? Is there
no, it's a great answer that they very much does complement the clarification. Okay, one more quick follow-up, and then I'm going to, there's a hand being raised. So your cause and effect map, how does that then, is that similar to the strategy map that also emphasizes the cause and effect?
No, it's not. It's kind of, the idea is that there's cause effect there. At Kaplan and Norton, when they designed that strategy map, they believed there was a very specific cause effect flow from learning and growth to internal business processes to customer to the financials. But over the last nearly 3 decades, I guess, that the balanced scorecard's been out there, people have just felt that that was too restrictive and didn't really match the way they set cause effect up in their organization. So a lot of people would flip the customers and the financial perspective around. A lot of people would add a different perspective, like you were talking before about sustainability, because it was missing. So the results map in Pump is not prescriptive in any way. It doesn't tell you where to find balance in the kinds of objectives you've got. It relies on your own strategy design process to do that, whether or not that strategy design is balanced scorecard. So the results map is also different to the strategy map in the sense that the cascade is visual on a single page, but with cascading a strategy map, you end up with these tiers of strategy maps, tiers or layers of them. It's very hard to see the connection, but you also end up with a little bit of that mini-me problem where everyone's just got a copy of the corporate scorecard, but it's just made a bit local. So it kind of isn't true cause effect in some cases with how it's cascaded. So there is a big difference.
Yeah. No, Stacey, excellent. Very well explained. I'm going to go to Gina in just a moment, but I have to give a shout out to say hi to Phil, because I'm so glad we got New Zealand time in. And after beating the Irish at the weekend, I'm sure he's on a high. Phil, good to see you. Glad you're able to make today. So thank you for that. Chita, who is one of our fellow, very close to being qualified as a fellow of the Institute, is first. I'm going to go ladies first and then to Alexander after that. Chita, are you ready to go?
Yes, thank you so much, Robin.
Good
Good morning, everyone. I'm really excited, Stacey. Thank you so much. I know it's so early for me, but I'm not an early bird, but I'm trying to this morning. I really enjoyed your presentation. It's got so much quality in there, and I'm just looking at this, I'm like, Stacey, where have you been all my life? Really, it's amazing, fantastic work. Just a question around the pump. I feel that it's a, can I call it a tool or the methodology? I don't know, but I feel that it's amazing. It's really great. But one thing that I'm looking at, I'm working with the Scottish government currently with the National Health Boards around some strategic planning work and redesign, obviously after COVID. One of the key things that we kind of are looking to design is something around performance measurement. It gets very complicated, and the problem that we face is we can design all these measures and put all these KPIs in place, but it goes back to being able to get the right data, having the right infrastructure to drive these key measurements that we put in place in order to get results, to understand where we are. And also there's that struggle on being able to ensure that everyone understands these measures that we've put in place and having the right golden source of data. And how do you, I mean, from your experience, how do you think that, we can arrive at a place whereby we can design and have the right measurements in place, but being able to use that to gather the right data and information to get the right result and understand where the bottleneck is or what the problems are with our data using the right measures?
Oh, okay. Stacey,
yes.
Good luck.
No. There's a three-part answer to Jita's question. It was a great question, Jita, and thank you for the feedback. I'm so glad you've found some useful stuff in what I've shared today. So the first, like, I'm not going to give you a full answer to this because it is a very big question, but three things that you really will find useful, I think, to think about. One is that proper measure implementation with a methodology like Pump is organic. You can't just bolt it on and you just expect that it's going to solve all the problems all in one go. And what I mean by organic is that you just start somewhere where there's the energy and the passion to do something, and you give those people the skills in Pump and you let them start using it to measure whatever is relevant to them at the time. And if they haven't got data, they find a way to get the data. Even if, and this kind of leads into the second piece that's important to remember is you don't have to get perfect data collection first up. Try some manual pilot programs to just see, how could you collect the data and try different ways to collect it. So use it as a bit of an experiment. Even if it's a manual data collection process, it's the way that you're going to learn the best data that you need so that you can get to a point where you build the infrastructure to get the data more formally, I guess. And the third piece is that you don't want to start too big. You don't want to do a full rollout of all of this. It's much better to have, just say you've got 8 teams in the organization. It's much better to have 8 teams, each focused on measuring just one thing that's really important, that isn't measured well enough, and that if they could measure it well and achieve it, it would make a tangible difference to the performance of the organization. It shouldn't be that you have those 8 teams trying to measure the 17 things each that are really important for them and that should get measured. That just, it kind of paralyzes people. It's just too much. And that then loops back to that first point I was making about it's very organic, is that once they've started measuring that one thing that really matters, and they get, they do a bit of manual data collection if they need to, they find a way to get the data a bit more formally, they use the measure, they get an improvement, that feeds the energy and the passion and the commitment to this. And then they go back around and the organic thing just grows a little bit. I guess it's kind of like throwing a pebble in the pond. Each ripple kind of turns into bigger ripples and it starts spreading around. So we kind of need the patience to let that happen and not expect it all to get fixed all at once. So don't get demoralized, don't get overwhelmed that it's all got to be fixed now. Instead, just trust that idea that it's organic. It doesn't have to be perfect to start with. And if you keep the focus very narrow for each team on just one thing that matters, you'll make headway much faster than throwing way too much time, effort, and money into a massive measurement rollout.
Fantastic. That's very helpful. Thank you so much. There's always that concept of less is more, isn't it? And just kind of start from the baby steps. And I like the idea of the run in the pilots, because I feel that most organizations just kind of put too many, KPIs out there, but there's no kind of way to drive that into being able to get the right data and be able to get the right information. So thank you so much. That's extremely helpful. I've got a second question, but I'll pass it on to the next person just because of our time.
Yeah, so Alexander's been patiently waiting. So we're going to jump from England to Poland with no soccer intended.
Thanks for that, Stacey. I also enjoyed your presentation. Thank you very much. I appreciate that. And I have also 2 questions, so I'll limit myself to one, just to give some room. So I think, Stacey, you stressed or highlight once or maybe even twice that you don't do any brainstorming in PAM. And would you mind developing a bit more on that? Because for me, it sounds like could be some room for brainstorming maybe in step 3, like designing meaningful measures. So what do you mean? What did you mean by not using brainstorming?
Alexander, I had the same question, so thank you for asking it.
Sure.
No, we don't permit brainstorming in PAMP, because brainstorming, when it was invented, was an idea for how to get people to open up and explore a lot of broad ideas that they wouldn't have thought of before. It kind of sounds like it might be relevant, but it's not. Measure design is not an opening up process. It's a narrowing down process. So in PUMP, we don't need brainstorming, because the measure design technique, and I'll briefly take you through it, but please trust me that it does take a little bit of time to learn it and practice it. We start just by writing down our measurable version of the result. The next step is that we list, and we don't brainstorm this either, we deliberately talk about what is the best evidence we would see and touch and hear and be able to detect somehow around us that would convince us that result was happening. What in the real world could we observe that would convince us that was happening? Not brainstorming, it's very deliberate. Then from each of those pieces of evidence that we can describe, we go to step 3 in this technique. And for each of them, we go, how could we quantify that? Would it be a percentage of something? Is it a count of something? Are we averaging something? How could we quantify each of those pieces of evidence? So we might end up with, at step 3, 5, 6, 12, 15 potential measures, but then we have to shortlist them. And the way we shortlist them is we throw out the ones that are really not that relevant at all in hindsight. We throw out the ones that are impossible to get the data for. Maybe somebody else is in control of the data and would never share it with us, or maybe the cost of getting that data would be way too much. So what we're left with is the strong measures that are still relatively feasible to implement. And so that could be 1 measure, that could be 2, that could be 3, but we pick the best up to 3 of them for the result. And that there's a bit more in that technique, but that's why we don't need to brainstorm, because we are being very deliberate to say, what is the evidence that would convince us we're achieving the result? How could we quantify that evidence? And of those potential measures that we've quantified, what are the most relevant and feasible for us to implement. Sorry, I was on a soapbox then. I felt I was
No,
quite
Stacey,
determined.
you had us all. Because I fully agree. I mean, one of the biggest problems is people dream about how to put it in. You know, my favorite one is our market share, you know, which is going to cost you thousands and hundreds of thousands of dollars. And, you know, yeah. So, you know, yeah, fully with you on that one. I'm going, one other question, and then we'll see if any closing one. What's your thought on all the software that's becoming available today that complements the implementation through the measures?
Let me preface my answer with this. I don't have time to evaluate all of the software that comes out, so I don't even bother to try and learn it or to figure out which ones I like and which ones I'd recommend. Every week I get invitations from software developers to promote their software. So I'm just not doing it. My expertise and the contribution I want to make in the world is what happens in our brains to come up with the good measures. And I would like to educate software developers to think that way as well, about how you actually come up with a good measure and how you not just come up with it, but how you define it well and how you present it well and how you highlight signals validly. That said, most of the software that I have seen around the place doesn't do that kind of thinking and ends up just creating a lot of pretty graphs, lots of color, lots of whiz bang moving bits, clicks and drill throughs and all that sort of stuff. But almost none of them would present a measure, for example, in the kind of chart that I use that helps us really see the true signals of change. They're all about how does this month compare to last month, and let's give it a red traffic light if it's negative, and let's give it a green traffic light if it's positive, and that kind of thing. I don't think that a lot of the vendors are putting the right thinking into the design of those apps. So buyer beware, I guess. If you can do the thinking process, you can then encourage the vendors to give you the tool in a way that's going to help automate the right thing.
I'm glad I asked. It was an excellent answer. Thank you. Phil, you've been very quiet and we got you on the call. Anything you want to ask from New Zealand's perspective?
Look, the reason I've been quiet, Robin, is that I'm just really impressed with everything that Stacey has presented. And I mean, you were reasonably impressive too, but Stacey really was.
Too late.
Oh,
Too
I'm
late,
sorry,
mate.
Robin. I like you, Phil.
I don't.
No, I just think it's really practical. I started my career teaching managers how to set objectives and set performance measures that were actually meaningful. And all of these decades later, I still see people who really don't know how to do it. And I've just been a judge on 2 panels for an international best practice competition, and people are showing all their measures and everything. And I'm looking at a lot of them thinking, you know what, those measures don't really tell you very much. So it's very refreshing to see such a structured, well thought out approach. And I love it, Stacey.
Thank you, Phil. That's good. I'm glad it speaks to you, and it's great to hear that someone like you is also seeing the same problems out there in the world, and I'm not imagining it.
You're definitely not. You're doing the good work.
Awesome.
Thank you.
I'm going to squeeze in one more final question before we let you go, Stacey, and then we're going to wrap up on the top of the hour. You started off, one of your comments was that many goals are too intangible, which I fully relate with, but I'm going to turn it around. And we all know there's been a massive shift to intangible versus tangible. So we're measuring much more intangible assets today. And I do a whole role play that, you know, the chair you sit on at your desk is on the balance sheet, but you know, you as a person, you don't even get on the balance sheet. You're a cost on the P&L. So there is a massive shift towards intangible assets. How have you addressed that in your approach over the last couple of years?
I haven't deliberately addressed it. It's always been in the approach that if there is something, a goal or an objective that you really believe matters, that you really think your organization should be shifting and changing itself in order to do it better or deliver it better or improve it somehow, if you can't articulate it in language that helps you recognize it happening in the real world around us, then you're not going to be able to meaningfully measure it. So whether it's a new thing about, intangible assets, about, how do you measure diversity? How do you measure sustainability? Those are, it's the same question just being applied to different topics, I guess, these days. So it's always been in Pump that you've got to be able to describe it in the real world. If you can't describe it in the real world, how are you ever going to know you're achieving it with or without measures?
All right. Again, lovely answer. Antonio, you must have been sitting in your hands a couple of times, because when you mentioned Dan Pink, Antonio just had dinner with Dan. They were presenting together. And he's also just published the project handbook from Harvard. So when you were talking about the difference in project management, you were very quiet, Antonio. I was watching you just, but I know it's early in Belgium, so you got him at a good time.
Yeah. No, but thank you, Stacey. Amazing. You are. It's really the essential part of strategy, what you just covered. So I'm going to watch the video again and connect with you, because this is so much also for the project world. So it's really great. Thank you, Robin, for inviting Stacey. So much to learn today. Thank you.
Stacey, you've been fantastic. I got to end with this. You pumped everyone up.
You couldn't have finished
you
that
were
better.
Clear,
Robin.
you were articulate. Everyone enjoyed your weasel opening. There were comments in the chat about corporate bingo. Your pictures, your style, your clarity has been fantastic. Way ahead many of the presentations. So thank you for giving us your time. We'll be sharing the pump with everyone. I will send out a link as a follow-up. And I'd like to thank everyone for doing the different times again. That allows Phil not to give me grief that it's too late at night in New Zealand. Okay, so thank you to everyone. It's been a pleasure. Especially thank you to Stacey for sharing so generously your material. And please do visit her site, staceybarr.com, and also purchase the books. To everyone, good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Have a wonderful month, and we'll see you in 4 weeks. Thanks, everyone.
Bye.
Thank
Cheers,
you.
bye-bye.
Bye, everyone.